601.
Live, this is Saturday Agenda with David Lipson.
G'day, welcome to the program. I'm David Lipson. The Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, will make an historic trip to Iran next week, becoming one of just a few high-ranking Western political figures to make such a visit in the last 3 decades. It's a crucial time for relations between Tehran and the West. A nuclear deal with the US is drawing nearer, and Iran is also playing a very important role in neighbouring Iraq and the fight against Islamic State militants. But according to Fairfax this morning, Julie Bishop will be pushing the asylum seeker issue in Tehran, lobbying Iran to take back hundreds of failed asylum seekers currently held in immigration detention. Well, joining me now, Liberal frontbencher Paul Fletcher, and soon to be with us, Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs Matt Thistlethwaite. Paul Fletcher, can you shed any light on what the government will be proposing for Iran?
Well, good morning, David. The key point is that we have a significant number of people who are in immigration detention at the moment from Iran, people who've been coming for a number of years, and people who have gone through the process of having their immigration status assessed. So as you know, if people are assessed and found to be refugees, Australia has an obligation to accept them, to provide asylum, and we obviously live up to that obligation. That's our moral and our legal obligation. But where there are people who are from Iran or indeed from other countries who are found not to have refugee status, then ultimately what we seek to do is have those people returned to their country of origin. And so certainly one of the things which obviously Foreign Minister Bishop will be in a position to raise with her counterpart, the Foreign Minister in Iran, is the question of people who have arrived from Iran, who are in Australia or in Nauru at the moment, who have been found not to have refugee status, and to have discussions about whether it's possible to have people in that situation returned to Iran. Now, of course, there'll be a range of other issues to be discussed. It's an important visit. I believe it's the first time that an Australian Foreign Minister has been to Iran for around 10 years. So this is an important visit, an important part of the government, the Australian government, staying engaged with the security situation in the Middle East, and I'm sure that'll be an issue that comes up.
The government has given cash assistance for, I think it's about 430 Iranian asylum seekers to voluntarily return back to Iran, but forcing them to go back is something quite different, and the Greens, for one, suggest that they could be in danger. Can the government guarantee that they will be safe if they're forcibly sent back?
Well, of course, one of the issues for discussion is the treatment of people who are returned, but it is important to make this point that when people come to Australia and make a claim for refugee status, if that claim is found to be valid, then we have an international legal obligation to give them asylum, and we live up to that obligation. But equally, if people are found not to have refugee status, that's to say as a legal matter they're not entitled to claim asylum in Australia, and then if they don't have another basis for coming to Australia, in other words, if they don't fit within the normal criteria of our immigration program, then our objective is ultimately to have those people return to the country that they came from. And that's been going on for many years now. It inevitably can raise difficulties and challenges, and that's an important reason why it does make sense to be having discussions with the countries from which significant numbers of asylum seekers have come, where we have people who are in immigration detention who have been found not to have refugee status.
Could it be, though, that even if when they left Iran they may have been economic migrants, as Bob Carr has in the past suggested, but then by the time they are forcibly sent back, Iran won't take kindly, won't view them well for having sort of fled the country and and left in that way. Sometimes, yeah, the best view isn't shared on them once they're sent back.
Well, it's important to make the point that the situation in the country from which people have come is assessed as part of the process of determining whether they're entitled to refugee status. And obviously the situation in a country from which people have come to Australia seeking asylum can vary. It does vary over time, and that's a factor that gets taken account of in the assessment process. But clearly, in the process now of seeking engagement with the Iranian government about the basis on which Iranians presently in immigration detention in Australia who've been found not to have refugee status, but having discussions about the basis on which they might be returned, then naturally the issues of the way in which they'll be treated upon return will come up in that discussion.
Okay, well, I just want to move on to another couple of issues. The Financial Review today, and Joe Hockey has told that paper that wealthy older Australians have been arranging their financial affairs so that they can get the age pension and in turn the seniors health card, which gives all sorts of concessions for medical expenses, for prescription drugs and that sort of thing. He's looking to split the health concessions card from the pension. Is that a good idea? I mean, you've got a lot of, I suppose, wealthy older Australians in your electorate. Is it worth splitting this up?
Well, let's go back for a moment and look at the context. As both Joe Hockey has been pointing out and as Social Services Minister Scott Morrison has been pointing out, we spend as a nation around $40 billion a year on the age pension. That's around 10% of the entire Commonwealth budget, entire Commonwealth expenditure. And we took a measure to the budget, as part of the budget last year, that would reduce the rate at which pension payments were indexed, and the intention was to get the growth in pension expenditure under control. Because if we don't get it under control, then it's going to become more and more difficult to sustain that funding, and so we need to make sure that we manage this properly so that we can continue to give older Australians the security that they deserve. Now, Minister Morrison, who has responsibility for pensions obviously in the context of his social services portfolio, has been making the point that he's open to looking at various options with a view to achieving this objective of reducing the rate at which money, the total expenditure on pensions grows. What Joe Hockey, the Treasurer, was saying in the interview that's reported this morning was making the point that we need to have a look at the totality of the drivers and incentives for people to be on the pension. He was making the point that as arrangements apply today, the seniors card arrangements, which then link into health benefits and so on, are linked to your pension status, and that in turn has encouraged a lot of people to say, well, how do I arrange my affairs so I'm eligible for at least the part pension, and in turn get that card status as well. And he's simply making the point that it's worth having a look at that issue, that linkage, to see, well, if you were to remove that linkage so the two weren't directly linked, would that then potentially change the set of incentives that people have, particularly people who have accumulated a reasonable quantity of assets as they get to a later stage in life? Are those people presently almost being encouraged by the system, by the set of incentives they face, to rearrange their affairs so that they're eligible for at least a part pension, but is potentially one of the major drivers of that the desire to get that seniors card? And so really making the point that it's worth having a careful look at that as part of an overall policy approach on the part of the Abbott government of saying, how do we get the rate of growth in total spending on pensions, $40 billion a year, under control, so that we can continue to make sure we can deliver the security that older Australians want.
Yeah. Paul Fletcher, thanks so much for that. We do appreciate your time this morning. Now to the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks for your time this morning. We'll start with asylum seekers. Do you believe that Iranians who have failed in their asylum claims should be forcibly sent back to that country if some sort of deal can be struck next week?
Well, David, Australia has a clear set of commitments that we're signatory to under international conventions, and that's to assess people who claim asylum in Australia in accordance with the convention and Australian laws and Immigration Department guidelines. And if a person is not found to be a genuine refugee, then the government does have